The gavel came down hard enough to crack the table, and Jeremiah Warren heard his name attached to something he had not agreed to. 40 acres, the farmhouse, and all outbuildings wagered against the entry fee for one Snaga Earthshaker in the Tidewater tournament. The auctioneer's voice carried across the crowded hall of the Saltrock Inn like a stone skipping over water, finding every ear in the room. Terms accepted by Mr. Warren on the 23rd day of the harvest month. Jeremiah froze where he stood at the back of the tavern, his bounty hunter's satchel still slung over his shoulder, road dust still on his coat from 3 days of riding along the Peninsula Causeway. He had been gone for 3 weeks tracking a skip named Holt Dresser across the marshes, and he had come back to find his name on a wager he had never made. The whole taproom was looking at him. Fishermen with their nets still smelling of brine, market traders and their ledger boys, the harbor master's wife with her permanent expression of moral disappointment. And at the center of it all, behind the long oak table that served as the Saltrock's unofficial courthouse on nights like this, sat Alderman Cobb with a sealed document in his fat hand, and a smile like a man who had been waiting for this exact moment. "There must be a mistake," Jeremiah said, and he said it quietly because quiet was how he handled things that were about to become very loud. "No mistake," Cobb said, spreading the document flat so the lamplight caught the signature at the bottom. "Your mark, your farm, witnessed by 2 standing members of this council." He gestured to the men on either side of him, both of whom found sudden interest in the rafters. Jeremiah walked forward through the crowd, which parted less out of respect and more out of the way a crowd parts for someone carrying bad news on their face. He looked at the document. He looked at the signature. And then he looked at Cobb for a long moment. "I was not on this peninsula 3 weeks ago," he said. "I was in the Graymore marshes, and I have a skip's manacles and a collection receipt from the Graymore sheriff to prove it." Cobb's smile did not waver because Cobb had been doing this sort of thing for 20 years, and he knew that in a hall full of people who owed him money or favors, it did not much matter what any single man could prove. "The mark is yours," Cobb said. "The wager stands. And since the tournament begins at dawn tomorrow, I suggest you make peace with it." That was the moment the door at the back of the inn opened. It was the kind of door that people used when they did not want to be seen using the front entrance, a low service door near the kitchen passage, and it opened now to admit someone who bent to get through it not because they were being careful, but because they were tall. When she straightened on the other side of it, the lamplight caught her the way it catches water all at once, spreading everywhere. Snaga Earthshaker was 26 years old, and she stood 2 inches over 6 feet in her boots, which were heavy-soled tracker's boots laced to the knee over fitted charcoal gray leathers that tucked into them snugly. Above the waist she wore a laced leather bodice the color of dark copper over a close-fitted shirt of deep green, the bodice cinched and shaped to her strong frame in a way that was unmistakably deliberate, the lacing pulled firm at the front over crossed leather cord. Her arms were bare from the elbow down, forearms wrapped in thin protective cord wrap in the fashion of peninsula fighters. Her hair was black and heavy, pulled back from her face in a thick braid that fell over one shoulder, and 2 small braids ran back from each temple the way orc women sometimes wore them when they were prepared for something physical. Her tusks were modest by orc standards, curving just past her lower lip, and her eyes were a deep amber color that the lamplight turned to something closer to gold. She was, by every standard Jeremiah had ever encountered or imagined, arresting. She also looked like someone who had been told a piece of information very recently that she was still deciding how angry to be about. Her gaze swept the room in a single efficient, past the kind of assessment a person makes when they have learned that rooms are full of threats, and landed on Alderman Cobb. "I want to see the document," she said. Her voice was lower than most women's voices and carried the peninsula orc's slight rolling accent at the edges of her words, the consonants just a little harder, the vowels just a little rounder. It was not aggressive. It was the voice of someone who had learned that volume was for people who were not sure they would be listened to. Cobb's smile shifted. "This is a private council matter, the document," Snaga said again, and she moved forward through the crowd the way water moves through stones, not forcing anything, simply filling the space that was already there. People stepped aside. They did it without quite realizing they were doing it. She reached the table and looked at the document for a long time without touching it. Then she looked up at Cobb. "I never agreed to be entered in any tournament," she said, "and I certainly never agreed to be the prize in a wager." "You are not the prize," Cobb said, recovering his footing with the ease of a practiced liar. "You are the entry. The farm is wagered against your participation fee. If you win the tournament, the wager is void and the farm stays with its owner. If you lose, the farm transfers to the Saltrock Council as tournament bond collateral." "And if I do not participate at all?" she asked. Cobb leaned back with the satisfaction of a man who has built a trap that closes in every direction. "Then the wager is forfeit by default. The farm transfers tonight, and Mr. Warren becomes a tenant in his own home at whatever rate the council sees fit to set." Jeremiah had been standing at the edge of all this, watching it unfold with the particular stillness of a man who hunts people for a living and knows when he is in someone else's snare. He was 30 years old, lean and brown from outdoor work, with a jaw that needed a shave and hands that were rougher than his voice suggested they ought to be. He wore a weathered trail coat over a plain shirt and canvas trousers, and at his hip was the short blade every bounty hunter carried along the peninsula roads. He was not remarkable to look at. He was the kind of man a crowd would not pick out of itself, but Snaga looked at him. She looked at him the way she had looked at the document carefully, taking everything in, deciding what it meant. "You are Jeremiah Warren," she said. "I am," he said, "and you did not make this wager." "I was in the Graymore marshes. I can prove it." Something moved through her expression. It was not quite sympathy and not quite calculation. It was the look of someone reassessing a situation in real time. "Then we have the same problem," she said. She turned back to Cobb. "I will compete in your tournament," she said, and the room made a collective sound of surprise that she cut through without pausing. "But I want it understood here in front of all of these witnesses that the wager attached to Jeremiah Warren's farm is fraudulent, and when I win, I will be bringing that matter before whoever on this peninsula has the authority to hear it." Cobb's smile returned. "You are welcome to try." The tournament was 3 days away, not 1 day as Cobb had announced. Jeremiah suspected the rush was meant to prevent exactly the kind of challenge that had just been laid down. He found that out later that night when Snaga sat across from him at a small table near the inn's cold fireplace, the rest of the crowd having largely dispersed, and laid out what she knew. "He has been acquiring property along the peninsula for 4 years, she said. "Always through legal-looking channels. A debt here, a wager there, a tenant agreement that turns into a lien." She had both hands wrapped around a clay mug of ale, and she spoke with the focused precision of someone who had been gathering this information for a reason. "My clan crosses the causeway twice a year to trade at the Saltrock market. He's been pressuring orc traders for 3 seasons. Last month he entered me in the tournament under a forged registration, my name, my physical description, my clan markings as identification." "Why you specifically?" Jeremiah asked. She looked at him steadily. "Because I am the best fighter on the peninsula, human or orc, and everyone knows it. If I win, he gets to claim the tournament's betting proceeds went to the council coffers betting proceeds that were placed against the property he means to take. If I lose, he gets the property outright and the embarrassment of an orc woman losing publicly besides." She paused. "And because if an orc woman causes any trouble about it, the Peninsula Council will side with the alderman every time." Jeremiah thought about that for a moment. He thought about his farm, 40 acres of rocky coastal soil that his father had broken with a horse, and a determination that bordered on the irrational, and that Jeremiah himself had kept going between bounty contracts because the land was the one thing in his life that stayed in one place. He thought about Cobb's practiced smile. "So we help each other," he said. "You have something to offer." There was no cruelty in the question. It was direct, which he was already learning was her natural way. "I have 3 weeks of documented travel in the Graymore Marshes, a receipt from the sheriff there, and the skip I brought back, who is currently in the Saltrock jail and who might have interesting things to say about the man who hired him to forge my signature if someone asked him the right questions." He paused. "And I know every inch of the Tidewater tournament grounds because I have worked security there for the past 4 years. Her amber eyes moved over him again with that same careful assessment. Then something shifted in her face, not softening exactly, but opening, the way a door opens that has been held shut. "All right, Jeremiah Warren," she said. "We have an alliance." She said it the way Orc clan leaders said it, not as a business arrangement, as something that meant something. The peninsula itself was called the Tongue, a long, narrow strip of rock and coastal heath that jutted into the gray northern sea, connected to the mainland by a single raised causeway that flooded at high tide and cut the Tongue off entirely for 6 to 8 hours every day. The Saltrock was its only real town, built around a natural harbor where fishing boats and trading vessels sheltered from the northern storms, and the Tidewater Tournament was its biggest annual event, a 3-day competition of combat, strength, and endurance that drew contestants from the mainland as well as the peninsula Orc clans. Jeremiah had grown up on the Tongue. His father had homesteaded there when the land was cheaper than it had any right to be, which was because it flooded, froze, and occasionally shook, with the kind of low tremors that the peninsula Orc clans said were the earth testing its own patience. He had learned to work the land in the off-seasons and take bounty contracts in the lean months, and by the time he was 20, he had understood that the Tongue was either the best place or the worst place to try to build a life, and he had chosen to stay anyway. He showed Snaga the tournament grounds the next morning. They walked out at low tide when the causeway was passable, and she moved through the open space with her eyes on everything at once, which was a habit he recognized from his own work. The grounds were a natural flat-bottomed bowl between 2 ridges near the peninsula's midpoint, surrounded by low stands of wind-twisted pines, with a central combat ring marked by thick rope lines and a series of stone and timber stands for spectators. "The footing in the north quarter is treacherous," he said. "There is a shelf of rock under the packed earth there. Anyone who fights south keeps better ground." "Who am I likely to face in the early rounds?" she asked. "Myra Stoneback from the mainland. She is a weapon fighter, very technical, but she favors her left and does not like to be pressured. Gorder Hale from the fishing quarter, big man, slow turning, has won the last 2 years on strength alone. And if Cobb has arranged things the way I think he has, you will face a mainland professional in the final round, someone imported specifically to take you down." She nodded once, taking all of it in. Then she turned and looked at the sea, the wind pulling at the loose ends of her braid. "Why is the farm important to you?" she asked. It was a personal question, and she asked it without softening it, which meant she thought he could handle a direct answer. "It is the only thing I own that does not move," he said. "My work takes me across the marshes and up into the hill country and sometimes as far as the western ports. Everything in my life follows me from place to place. The farm is the place I come back to." She was quiet for a moment. "My clan crosses the causeway to trade," she said. "We have done it for 40 years. When Cobb makes it harder for us, he makes it harder for the 20 families that depend on that trade." She turned back to look at him. "So the farm matters to you the way the crossing matters to us. You have something worth protecting." "So do you," he said. She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read yet. He would learn to read it, but he did not know that yet. It was the expression she wore when someone said something true that she had not expected them to say. They went back to the Saltrock, and they did what allies do, which is work. Jeremiah went to the jail and spoke to Holt Dresser, the skip he had brought in, and explained in quiet and specific terms that the man who had hired him to forge a bounty hunter's signature was the same man who currently had the ear of the Saltrock Council, and the willingness to have awkward problems solved quietly. Dresser, who was facing 3 months in the Peninsula jail and had no particular loyalty to Cobb, agreed to provide a written account. Snaga went to the tournament registrar and requested, in her direct and unmovable way, a copy of her entry documentation, a copy of the wager terms, and the name of the witness who had verified her identity for registration purposes. The registrar, who was a clerk named Bess who owed nothing to Cobb and who was secretly fascinated by Snaga, provided all three. They met back at the inn in the late afternoon and spread everything across the table. Jeremiah's travel receipt, the sheriff's signature, Dresser's written account, the tournament entry documentation with its verification witness, a man named Tallow who worked as one of Cobb's casual laborers and who had, apparently, verified Snaga's identity based on a description Cobb had given him rather than any actual meeting. "That is enough for a complaint," Jeremiah said. "To whom?" Snaga asked, and she was not being rhetorical. She genuinely wanted to know who on this peninsula could hear a complaint against its own alderman. "The harbor charter," he said. "The tongue is technically under harbor jurisdiction for property disputes, and the harbor authority answers to the Mainland Trade Commission, not the local council. There is a charter clerk in the harbor master's office who has the authority to freeze property transfers pending investigation." She leaned forward over the table, and he noticed that she smelled like sea air and something like cedar, clean and sharp. "You know this peninsula thoroughly," she said. "I have been catching people who try to hide in its corners for 10 years, he said. "You learn its structure." She almost smiled. It was not quite a smile yet. It was the thing that happened at the edges of her expression right before a smile, a small, involuntary softening. He noticed it the way you notice a light being lit in a dark window, with the particular attention of someone who has been looking at the dark for a while. "Tomorrow," she said, "I fight. Tonight we go to the harbor charter clerk." "We," he repeated, not as a question. "We have an alliance," she said, as simply as that. The harbor master's office was a low stone building right at the harbor's edge, smell of salt and tar seeping through its walls, a single lantern in the window that told the charter clerk was working late. His name was Aldous, and he was a small, dry man who took the documents they spread before him with the focused attention of a man who has spent 30 years finding the errors that other people hoped no one would find. He read everything twice. He looked up at Jeremiah. He looked up at Snaga. He looked back at the documents. "This travel receipt," he said, "is dated 3 weeks ago, which is before the wager document was supposedly signed." "Yes," Jeremiah said. "And this account from your skip, this Dresser, describes being hired to copy your mark from an existing document." "Yes," Jeremiah said again. "And this verification witness for the tournament entry identified the entrant based on a description rather than a personal meeting." "That is what the registrar's notes show," Snaga said. Aldous folded his hands on top of the documents. "I can freeze the property transfer and issue a charter hold pending investigation," he said. "What I cannot do is make any of this go away quietly, because if I freeze Cobb's transaction, he will know tonight, and he will spend tomorrow making things difficult for everyone involved." "Let him," Snaga said. She said it without heat, without drama, with simple, flat certainty, and Aldous looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man recalibrating his assessment of the situation. "Indeed," he said. "Let us proceed." By the time they left the harbor master's office, the wind had picked up off the sea, carrying the smell of approaching weather. The street between the office and the inn was empty and dark, lit only by the occasional storm lantern hung at doorways, and the tide was coming in on the causeway behind them, cutting the tongue off from the mainland with the slow, inexorable surety of the sea doing what it always did. They walked without talking for a while, and it was a comfortable silence which surprised Jeremiah, because comfortable silences with new people were not something he had much experience with. He tended to work alone and live alone and arrive at places alone, and the presence of another person in his sideways peripheral vision was something he usually had to adjust to. But she walked at his pace, not ahead of it and not behind it, and the quiet between them was the kind that did not require filling. "Can you win it?" he asked finally. "The tournament?" She looked at him sideways. "Yes," she said. "Cobb will have arranged something. I meant what I said about the imported professional." "I know," she said. "Tell me about them." "I do not know who specifically, but the kind of fighter Cobb would hire. They will be technically excellent, they will have studied whoever is favored to win, and they will play for points rather than power in the early rounds to save themselves for the final." She thought about this. They had reached the inn's front door, but neither of them moved to go in yet. The wind was pushing harder now, the sea sounding closer than it was. "Then I will not play for points," she said. "I will end my earlier fights quickly and let them do nothing to prepare." "That burns energy," he said. "I have energy to burn," she said simply. He laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised out of him, and she turned to look at him laughing with that not-quite smile again, wider this time, the edges of it reaching towards something that might become real if it had the right reason. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "I have not made someone laugh in a long time. I forgot it was something that happened." He looked at her in the lamplight of the inn's doorway. The wind was pulling loose strands of hair across her face, and she pushed them back with one cord-wrapped forearm in a gesture that was entirely practical and somehow more appealing for it. "It happens around you more than you might think," he said, and meant it as something light, but it landed a little heavier than that, and she felt it land. He saw her feel it, a small stillness, the kind that comes right after something unexpected. "Get some sleep, Jeremiah Warren," she said, and the way she said his name was different from the way she had said it the first time. Fuller, more certain of itself. "You too," he said, and went inside. He did not sleep particularly well. The tournament began at what the peninsula called the second morning bell, when the tide was fully out, and the causeway stood above the water line, and people could make their way from the mainland to the grounds if they had left early enough. The stands filled steadily through the early hours with locals, traders, and the particular breed of mainland visitor, who followed the tournament circuit for the betting opportunities it provided. Jeremiah was at the grounds before the gates opened, not as a competitor, but as a man who knew where the important conversations happened when most people were looking at the main ring. He had his ear to the ground that Cobb used, which was the southeast corner of the spectators' stands where the alderman always stationed himself with his ledger, and his 2 council witnesses, and his expression of comfortable authority. He heard the name of the imported fighter from a betting book runner who was not trying to be quiet. Vance Harrow, from the mainland city of Thornmere, 3-time consecutive champion of the Central Highlands Circuit. Harrow was a human fighter, male, 35 years old, who had won against orc and human opponents alike, and who had been quietly added to the tournament's entry list that morning under an assumed registration that had been prepared ahead of time. Jeremiah found Snaga in the fighter's preparation area, which was a canvas-sided enclosure behind the eastern ridge, and told her everything. She was wrapping fresh cord around her forearms when he arrived, sitting on a low bench, her braid pinned up and secured for combat. She listened without stopping what she was doing. "Harrow," she said when he finished. "I have heard of him. He is very fast and he telegraphs very little. His weakness is that he commits fully when he thinks he has an advantage, and he sometimes commits too early." "How do you know that?" Jeremiah asked. "Because I make a point of knowing things," she said. "Sit down, you are hovering." He sat down on the bench beside her, which put them close together in the small enclosure, and handed her the end of the cord she was trying to reach behind her wrist. She took it without looking, wound it twice, and knotted it with practiced ease. "Thank you," she said. "What do you need from me today?" he asked. She did look at him then, and there was something in the look that was warm in a way he had not seen from her before, warm and a little surprised by itself, as though she had not expected to be asked. "Stay where I can see you," she said. "In the stands close to the ring. If Cobb tries to interfere with anything between the rounds, I want to know about it immediately." "Done," he said. She started to rise, and then she paused. She looked at him for a moment directly in the way she had of looking at things she was taking seriously. "The farm," she said. "If something goes wrong today, nothing is going to go wrong," he said. "If it does," she repeated firmly, not allowing reassurance to substitute for practicality. "You have copies of everything we gave to Aldous. The charter hold is already in place. Cobb cannot transfer the property while the investigation is active. If the tournament goes badly, there is still the legal path." He understood that she was reassuring him, that she had taken a moment in the middle of preparing for her own combat to make sure he knew his interests were protected. It did something to him that he was not entirely prepared for. "Snaga," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You did not have to come back last night," he said, "when you heard what Cobb had done. You did not have to come into that inn, you could have just walked away." She was quiet for a moment. "No," she said, "I could not have. He used my name. He put my name on something I did not agree to." She paused. "And whoever's farm was being stolen deserved to know." Another pause shorter. "I am glad it was yours." She said that last part quietly, as though she was not entirely certain she intended to say it aloud. And then she stood up and walked out of the enclosure toward the main ring, and he watched her go with the particular feeling of a man who has just had a window opened in a room he did not know was stuffy. The tournament's early rounds went the way Jeremiah had predicted and the way Snaga had planned. She did not play for points. She did not circle and probe. She assessed each opponent in the first 30 seconds of each bout, and then moved with a decisiveness that was almost shocking to watch, not brutal, because the tournament had rules about prohibited strikes, and she followed every one of them precisely, but final. She ended her first 3 fights in under 4 minutes combined, which sent a ripple through the spectators' stands that started as surprise and moved quickly toward the kind of awed attention that fills stands to standing capacity. Jeremiah watched from the front of the stands, close to the ring as she had asked, and he watched her with the split attention of a man who is also watching the man in the southeast corner. Cobb's ledger was open, and his pen was moving, which meant betting activity was significant, and the expression on his face had moved from satisfaction to something more carefully neutral, which was more concerning. Between rounds, Jeremiah moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of his work, listening to conversations, reading the betting boards, and looking for the man named Vance Harrow. He found him in the northwest corner of the grounds, a lean man with a shaved head and methodical eyes who was watching Snaga's fights with the professional attention of someone storing information. Harrow's registration had listed him as V. Herrick from the coast, which was close enough to the truth to avoid technical fraud while being different enough to obscure his identity on the boards. He went back to the enclosure during the midday break and told Snaga. She drank water from a skin, methodically, not hurrying. Her leathers were dusty but undamaged. She had a small mark on her jaw from a tournament staff strike that had grazed rather than landed, which she had apparently not noticed. "You have something on your jaw," he said. She touched it. "I know, does it look serious?" He stepped closer and looked. It was a graze, already purpling slightly, not deep. He was close enough to see the fine detail of her face, the even dark green of her skin, the slight metallic quality the morning light found in it, the precise way her brows pulled together when she was thinking. "No," he said, "it will be sore tomorrow." "Tomorrow," she said, "I intend to have other things to be sore about." Did Harrow show anything useful? "He is very still while watching," Jeremiah said. "He does not react to anything. That suggests he already has a plan and is just confirming it." "Then I will not give him what he planned for," she said. "He planned for what he saw in your early rounds," Jeremiah said, "which means he planned for fast and decisive." She looked at him. "You are suggesting I change my approach." "I am suggesting that if he planned for decisive, uncertain and patient might throw him." She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "That is counterintuitive advice. I specialize in counterintuitive approaches. It is why people skip out on their bonds and I still find them." That not quite smile again, fuller than the ones before it, close enough to Reel that he could feel the warmth of it from where he stood. "All right, Jeremiah Warren," she said. "I will be patient." The afternoon rounds moved forward and she was patient, and it was extraordinary to watch. She did not suddenly become passive. She was still Snaga Earthshaker, still moving with the unhurried power of someone who trusts completely in her own competence. But she drew her fights out, let her opponents think they were controlling the pace, and found them when they overcommitted. It was a different kind of watching. The crowd felt it differently too, the tension building rather than releasing quickly. And by the time she reached the final round as the tournament day wound toward its close, the stands were packed 3 deep. Harrow entered the ring across from her, and he looked at her with the neutral professional assessment he had been applying all day, and then the timekeeper rang the bell. She was patient. He was fast, and he was technically excellent, and the first 2 minutes were the most difficult thing Jeremiah had ever watched while being completely unable to do anything about it. Harrow moved in fluid, efficient patterns, testing every angle, committing just enough to force response and then withdrawing before she could capitalize, and she absorbed it and moved and watched and did not give him what he was looking for. 3 minutes. 4. And then Harrow did it. He saw an angle that looked like an opening, and he committed. He committed the way Snaga had predicted, fully, at speed, with everything behind it. She was not where the opening had been. She was where he was going to be, and when he arrived she was already there and he was already extended, and the tournament referee's hand went down, and Harrow's shoulder went to the earth, and the bell rang, and the stands erupted. Jeremiah exhaled for what felt like the first time in 4 minutes. She looked up from where she stood at the center of the ring, and found him immediately in the crowd. Across the noise and the press of people, through the dust the wind was kicking up off the dry tournament ground, she found him. And she did something she had not done once in the entire day. She smiled. Not the not-quite smile, the real one, full and direct and aimed entirely at him. He felt it like something physical. That was the moment Alderman Cobb stood up from his corner of the stands and raised his voice over the crowd noise, and the moment when what Jeremiah had known was coming actually arrived. "I am calling the result under protest." Cobb's voice, trained for exactly this kind of public moment, cut through the noise with practiced authority. "On the grounds that the winning competitor's registration is under investigation by this council, and the result therefore cannot stand pending review." The crowd noise shifted from celebration to confusion, which was exactly what Cobb wanted, and he was already moving toward the ring, his council witnesses trailing behind him, his ledger under his arm. Jeremiah was already moving too. He reached the ring barrier at the same moment Cobb reached it from the other side, and he spoke first, loudly, in the carrying voice he had developed from years of announcing warrants in crowded public spaces. "The charter hold filed with the harbor master's office last night by Charter Clerk Aldis takes precedence over any council action involving this property or this registration dispute," he said. "The tournament result is valid. Any challenge to it goes through the harbor authority, not the Peninsula Council." There was a startled silence. Cobb's mouth opened and closed. From the harbor master's office side of the stands, because Jeremiah had sent word to Aldis the previous evening about exactly what might happen. Clerk Aldis stepped out of the crowd with a folded document in his hand, and the expression of a small, dry man who has been waiting for his specific moment. "The charter hold," Aldis said in his precise, careful voice, "was filed and sealed as of last evening. It covers the property described as 40 acres on the Peninsula Road, including all buildings and outbuildings. The alderman has no authority to initiate any council review of this matter until the charter investigation is complete, which, pending the evidence submitted, I am prepared to state will likely find in favor of the aggrieved parties." Silence. Then the harbor master himself, who had apparently followed Aldis out of interest or self-preservation, said loudly, "Cobb, sit down." Cobb did not sit down. He looked at Jeremiah. He looked at Snaga. He looked at Aldis. He made the calculation that people make when they discover that the trap they built has been rebuilt around them while they were not looking, and his expression went through several stages before settling somewhere between fury and the particular blankness of a man deciding how to retreat. "This is not over," Cobb said, and it was not quite as impressive as he intended it to sound. And then he was walking away through the crowd, and his council witnesses were walking behind him, and the crowd was watching all of it with the riveted attention of people who had come to see a tournament and gotten considerably more than they had paid for. Snaga stepped out of the ring and walked to where Jeremiah stood. "That," she said, "was very well timed." "I had help," he said. "Aldous has been waiting to do that for approximately 2 years. She looked at him with that warm directness that he was starting to understand was her natural expression when she was with someone she trusted, and something settled in the air between them that had been unsettled since the night before, something that had nothing to do with farms or forged documents. "It is not finished," she said. "He will try other approaches." "I know," he said, "but tonight it is finished enough." The harbor master held a brief public hearing right there at the tournament grounds, because the crowd was already assembled, and there was precedent for emergency charter review in public spaces on the tongue, which was the kind of thing that happened on a peninsula cut off from official mainland processes 6 hours out of every 24. It was not the formal hearing that would follow in the coming weeks, but it was the moment that mattered, the moment that happened in the open, in front of people, with the specific kind of public record that is made when 100 witnesses hear the same thing at the same time. The evidence was presented: Jeremiah's travel documents, the sheriff's receipt from Graymore, Dresser's account of the forgery commission, the registrar's notes showing Tallow's false verification, the tournament entry documentation, all of it laid out in front of people who lived on this peninsula and knew these names and had seen Cobb work his way through properties for 4 years. It was not a long proceeding. The harbor master, whose name was Bridget, and who was a woman of 60 with the permanent squint of someone who spent her life reading weather, looked at the documents and looked at the crowd, and made the kind of decision that harbor authority had been designed to make quickly in emergencies. "Property hold confirmed," she said. "Warren Farm remains under charter protection. Wagered document is declared fraudulent and void. Matter referred to Mainland Commission for full investigation of Peninsula Council activities." She looked at Cobb's empty corner. "The alderman will receive notice of his required appearance." Cheering. Real, full-throated cheering from people who had been watching the slow acquisition of Peninsula property for years and had not known what to do about it. Fishermen and traders and the harbor master's own staff and tournament spectators, who had no direct stake in it, but understood instinctively when a thing that should not have been allowed to continue had been stopped. Snaga stood beside Jeremiah in the middle of all of it, and the wind off the sea was cold and clean, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she reached out and took his hand, not gently, not tentatively, the way she did everything directly with the full weight of her intention. Her hand was larger than his and stronger, the cord wrapping still on her forearms, and she held his hand the way you hold something you mean to keep. He held hers back. "Come on," he said, eventually. "There is a warm fire at the inn, and I believe someone owes me a drink." She laughed. It was a full sound, unguarded, the kind of laugh that happens when someone forgets to be careful for a moment, and he thought he had never heard anything he liked as much as that sound. They ate at the inn that night, a proper meal this time, the kind the inn's kitchen produced when the tide was in, and no one was going anywhere, and there was genuine cause for celebration. The room around them was loud and warm, full of peninsula people who kept stopping by their table to say things, to Jeremiah mostly, and to Snaga in that careful way that people who are reassessing their assumptions speak to someone they have not known how to look at before. She accepted all of it with the same even directness she applied to everything, neither preening nor dismissing. When the room finally quieted, it was late, and the tide was deep in the causeway outside, and there was nowhere to go and nothing to do, and they sat by the inn's main fire with the remains of their meal and a second round of drinks and the comfortable silence that had been there since the night before, except it was fuller now, warmer, carrying more weight. "You looked at me," Jeremiah said, "at the end of the final fight. You found me in the crowd immediately." She looked at the fire. "I know where you are," she said. "I have known where you were all day." He let that settle. "Among my people," she said, still looking at the fire, "there is a custom. When a warrior competes, they choose someone to hold their focus, a person in the crowd whose presence they carry into the ring." She paused. "I chose you." He did not say anything immediately because some things deserve the room to exist for a moment before they are responded to. "I am not a warrior," he said finally. "No," she agreed, "but you are mine." She said it simply, the way she said everything that mattered without decoration or hedging, and she turned from the fire to look at him while she said it, and the firelight found her face in the way lamplight finds things you were not expecting to see, and he felt the full weight of it. "In Orc custom," he said carefully, "what does that mean, when you say that?" "It means I am claiming you," she said, "if you will be claimed." He held her gaze, this woman who was a head taller than him and had won a championship today, and had walked through a crowd toward a corrupt alderman without flinching, and had laughed that one full, unguarded laugh that he was going to hear in his memory for a very long time. "Yes," he said, "I will be claimed." Something moved through her face that he understood was significant, a relief that she had not allowed herself to expect, a satisfaction that was deep and real and not at all composed. She reached across the table and touched his jaw with 2 fingers, very lightly, the way you touch something you are checking is real. "Then we should seal it," she said. "In Orc custom, a claiming is not complete until it is marked." "What does marked mean?" he asked. She reached into the small belt pouch she carried and produced a short length of woven cord, deep copper and black. The colors she wore braided into a pattern that required 2 hands to make and therefore required someone to make it for you. She held it out. "If you wear this," she said, "any one of my people who sees it will know you are claimed, that you are mine and I am yours. It is not a binding in the human ceremony sense, you may remove it if you choose, but while you wear it, it is the realest thing I can give you." He looked at the cord. He looked at her. "Put it on," he said. She moved to sit beside him rather than across the table, smoothly, naturally, the way she moved through space, and she tied the cord around his left wrist with the same care she had used wrapping her own forearms that morning, a secure knot, the kind that would not slip or loosen. Her hands on his wrist were warm and very sure. When she finished, she kept hold of his wrist for a moment, her thumb resting against the pulse point there, and then she looked up at him from that close distance, and the firelight was between them and around them, and he put his free hand against her face, his thumb at her cheekbone, and she turned into it the way you turn toward warmth, and then there was no distance between them at all. She kissed him the way she did everything, directly, without hesitation, with her full attention, and he kissed her back with everything he had, which turned out to be considerably more than he had known he was carrying. Her hand came up to the back of his neck and held there, not with force but with certainty, and his other hand found the edge of her jaw, and it was the kind of kiss that answers questions you forgot you had asked. When they finally parted, the fire had burned down slightly, and the inn around them was very quiet. "I have been alone for a long time," he said, not as a complaint, just as a truth he was offering. "So have I," she said. "Warriors usually are. You do not have to be." She looked at him with that warm, full directness, and her thumb moved along his jaw, and she said, "I know. You are here." They talked until the fire went fully to embers, and they said things they had not said to anyone else in years, and by the time they finally made their way separately to their rooms, it was past the middle of the night, and Jeremiah lay in his narrow in-room bed and stared at the ceiling, and felt the cord around his wrist, and thought about a woman who had said, "I know where you are. I have known where you were all day," as though it were the most natural thing in the world, and felt less alone than he could remember feeling in his adult life. The investigation of Cobb's activities took 3 weeks, which was fast for mainland legal proceedings and slow for people who had to live on the same peninsula as the man being investigated. The harbor charter hold remained in place, which meant Cobb could not move on the Warren property or anything else while the commission was active, and the commission had an uncomfortable number of Cobb's ledger entries to work through, because it turned out that Dresser, once persuaded, was a very thorough witness with an excellent memory for names and transaction dates. The formal hearing was held in the Saltrock Town Hall, which was a larger building than the inn and had proper gallery seating, and a raised platform for the commissioner who had come from the mainland for exactly this purpose. It was, in the full legal sense, a proper proceeding, with documents and witnesses and testimony, and the careful architecture of due process. It was also attended by what appeared to be most of the peninsula's population. Cobb arrived with 2 mainland advocates who wore expensive coats and had the confident bearing of men who had extracted clients from difficult situations before. The Peninsula Council members who had signed his documents arrived separately and sat in the gallery rather than behind the alderman's table, which told its own story about how they expected the morning to go. Jeremiah sat at the complainant's table with Aldous beside him, and the advocate the harbor authority had appointed, a sharp woman from the coastal bar named Dervish, who had a mind like a trap and the particular satisfaction of someone who had been looking for exactly this opportunity. Snaga sat in the gallery directly in his line of sight, and when he glanced up she met his eyes steadily and gave him the smallest nod. He felt it in his spine. The hearing proceeded. Documents were presented. Tallow, the false verification witness, had provided a full account in writing and was not present to be cross-examined because he had left the peninsula the previous week, which the commissioner noted as significant. Dresser testified in person, which he did with the dogged specificity of a man earning his goodwill with the system. The sheriff's receipt from Graymore was entered. Cobb's advocates objected to several items of evidence and were overruled. Cobb himself was called to the stand. This was the moment. Jeremiah had known it was coming, and he had prepared for it in the way he prepared for everything, by thinking through every possible exit the other person might take in deciding how to close them. But he had not done this alone. The night before, at the inn, he and Snaga and Aldous had sat at their small table and been thorough. Cobb was questioned about the wager document. He maintained that Jeremiah had signed it, that the witnesses were reliable, that the entire matter was a misunderstanding. He was patient and practiced and convinced, in the way experienced liars are convinced, that his version of events was the one that would be believed. And then Commissioner Valdres asked him about the tournament entry for one Snaga Earthshaker. "I did not enter anyone by that name," Cobb said. "The registration was submitted by the tournament organizing committee." "Of which you are chair," Valdres said, "in an administrative capacity." And the verification witness, Tallow, verified the entrant's identity based on a description provided to him by you personally. "I do not recall." Tallow's written account states quite specifically that he received a physical description from you, along with verbal confirmation that the individual would be competing, and that verification was a formality. Valdres looked at the document. His exact words are, "The alderman said it was just for the paperwork and he would square it with the council." Silence in the hall. "I would like to ask," Valdres continued, in the particular tone of a commissioner who already knows the answer to his question, "whether you can explain why a person's identity would be verified for tournament entry by someone who had never met them, based solely on a verbal description from the organizing committee chair." Cobb's advocates leaned toward him. He spoke something quiet to them. They spoke back. "My client," one of the advocates said, "declines to answer on grounds that the question invites speculation." "Your client," Valdres said, "is the organizing committee chair and the question invites factual testimony, not speculation." He looked at Cobb directly. "Can you explain it?" Another silence. No, Cobb said finally, and it was the most revealing thing he had said all morning. Valdres sat back. He looked at the full table of documents before him. He looked at the gallery, which was absolutely silent in the way things go silent right before something large happens. In the matter of the Warren property wager, he said, the commission finds the document fraudulent, the wager void, and the property fully restored to its registered owner, Jeremiah Warren, with no outstanding claims, liens, or obligations attached. He continued before any sound could start. In the matter of the tournament entry for Snaga Earthshaker, the commission finds the registration fraudulent and the use of her identity without consent a violation of charter protection afforded to all persons, of any origin, engaged in legal commerce or competition on peninsulas under harbor charter jurisdiction. He looked at Cobb. The commission recommends immediate removal of Alderman Cobb from his peninsular council position, pending full mainland review of all transactions conducted during his tenure. A formal referral is being made to the mainland courts. The charter hold on all pending Cobb transactions will remain in place until that review is complete. The gallery went from silence to sound all at once, and the sound was not polite. It was the sound of 4 years of accumulated grievance finding a place to go. Jeremiah looked up at the gallery and found Snaga immediately. She was standing, which she had been forced to do when the people around her stood, and she was looking at him, and the expression on her face was not the triumphant expression he might have expected. It was something softer, a private, specific joy that she was sending directly to him across the noise and the crowd, meant for no one but him. He smiled. She smiled back, and it was the real one, full and unguarded, and it hit him the same way it had hit him the first time, like light coming through a window you did not know could open. Outside the town hall, afterward, in the hard wind of the peninsula midday, the crowd spilled out onto the harbor road and broke into a dozen different excited conversations, and the business of being a small community that has just watched something significant happen to it. Cobb departed with his advocates through a side door, and the council members who had been his witnesses found other people to talk to. And Bess, the registrar, stood near the building steps with the slightly dazed expression of someone who has watched a building fall down and is still adjusting. Snaga found him near the harbor wall, where the wind was strongest and the sea was closest. She looked at his wrist where the cord was and touched it briefly with one finger. "Done," she said. "Done," he agreed. She turned to look at the sea, the wind pulling at everything, the orc braid over her shoulder whipping back. "There is something I should tell you," she said. He waited. "My clan crosses the causeway at the next new moon," she said. 3 weeks. When the tide is right, they will come to trade, and I have been traveling ahead of them to arrange goods and terms. I was planning to return with them when the trading was done. He looked at her profile. "That was my plan," she said, "before all of this. And now," he said. She turned to look at him. "Now I have you," she said. It was as simple as that, as direct as everything she said, and it landed the same way everything she said directly landed, with full weight and no softening. "What does that mean for the plan?" he said. "I want you to come with me," she said. "When my clan returns across the causeway, I want you to come." She paused. "I know that is a significant thing to ask. You have a farm here, you have work here, you have a life here." "I have a farm I have been maintaining from a distance for 10 years, he said slowly. "A bounty practice that works as well from the mainland as from the peninsula because the skips are mostly mainland anyway, and a life that has primarily consisted of being alone and coming back to an empty farmhouse." She watched him. "What would it mean," he said, "for your clan, to bring a human?" "There will be those who question it," she said honestly. "My clan is not closed to humans. There is history and trading between us that runs deep. But a claimed human is different from a trading partner. I will be asked to justify it." "And can you?" he asked. She looked at him with that steady amber gaze, and she said, "You earned my respect in the first hour I knew you. You kept your word in every hour after. You stood next to me in a room full of people who would have been glad to see me fail, and you spoke first and you spoke loud and you did not once treat me as someone who needed to be protected." She paused. "I will tell my clan that he is mine and I am his, and if anyone wants to argue with that, they are welcome to argue with me." He felt the cord on his wrist like it was warm. "I will need to find someone to work the farm while I am away," he said. She blinked. And then she understood that he was saying yes, and the expression that crossed her face was one he had not seen from her yet, unguarded and luminous and wholly present. The joy of someone who was genuinely surprised to have been met exactly where they stood. She stepped forward and put both hands on his face, her palms against his jaw, tilting his face up to hers, and she kissed him in the middle of the harbor road with the sea wind around them and the Saltrock going about its business in every direction. And she kissed him the way she had kissed him the first time, except with more certainty, if that was possible, with the full, settled certainty of someone who knows they are in the right place. When she pulled back, she looked at him from that close distance and said, in a low voice, "My people will love you." "Will they?" he said. "Some of them will be difficult about it first," she said honestly. "But yes, they will love you." "You are very easy to love once someone pays attention," he laughed. She laughed too, and it was still the best sound he knew. They spent the next 3 weeks on the peninsula, using the time well. Jeremiah arranged for a neighbor named Fen Holder, a capable, honest man who had worked seasonal harvests on the Warren farm for years, to manage the property in his absence, with a proper written agreement and a generous cut of any earnings, and with Jeremiah's detailed instructions about everything from the root cellar's drainage situation to the particular temperament of the fence line on the eastern boundary. He sorted his bounty practice, notifying the 2 guild offices he worked with that he would be operating from across the causeway for a period and providing contact details for each. The work would not stop. It would move, the way he had always moved, which was the point. Snaga spent the 3 weeks in what she described as correspondence, but what was actually a series of intensive written exchanges with her clan's trade lead, an elder named Dorat, who was, by Snaga's account, sharp as a blade, deeply traditional, and very much going to want a face-to-face explanation of the cord currently on the human's wrist. She wrote these letters with the same focused precision she brought to everything, and she shared them with Jeremiah because she had apparently decided that they were a we, and that meant sharing what she was managing. He read the letters and asked questions and offered nothing that was not asked for, and she appreciated that in the precise way she appreciated everything practical and genuine. One evening near the end of the first week, they were at the inn, the same table, the same fire, and she was writing and he was working on his own correspondence, and it was the comfortable, ordinary coexistence of 2 people who have stopped performing at each other and are just present, and he looked up at her and thought, this is what it should feel like. This precisely. Right here. She looked up and caught him looking. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "You are impressive when you are working." She considered this. "You are not so bad yourself," she said, and returned to her letter. And he saw the edge of the real smile tucking itself into her expression as she looked down. And he went back to his own work with the specific contentment of someone who has stopped looking for something because they have found it. They walked the peninsula together in the mornings before the day started. The tide-cut shoreline and the wind-twisted pines and the rocky coastal paths that Jeremiah knew by memory and Snaga learned quickly, because she was the kind of person who learned terrain by engaging with it directly, putting her hands on rocks and her feet on unfamiliar paths until the land was hers too. He showed her the farm, the 40 acres that were now unambiguously his, the farmhouse with its stone chimney and its warped front door, and its view of the sea from the upper window. She walked through it with the same careful attention she gave everything, and in the kitchen she put her hand against the fireplace stones and felt their warmth, and in the main room she looked at the window with its sea view, and in the small back room that Jeremiah used as a sort of combination storage and thinking space she found on a shelf, a carved wooden figure, rough and simple, a figure in motion, a running animal, something like a wolf. "Your father's?" she asked. "Mine," he said. "I made it the winter I was 19. My first winter alone here after he died." He paused. "It is not very good." "It is very good," she said, and she said it with such flat, simple certainty that he did not argue. She put it back carefully, exactly as she had found it. She looked around the small room and then at him. "This is a good house," she said. "It has been well lived in." "It is about to be less lived in for a while," he said. "Buildings that are loved do not forget it," she said. "It will be here." He reached for her hand, which was becoming a thing he did naturally, and she gave it, which was becoming a thing she did naturally, and they stood at the window of the small back room and looked at the sea while the tide came in and the causeway slowly disappeared and the tongue became itself again, the isolated finger of land jutting into the gray sea, belonging to no one and everyone and the particular few who had chosen it. "Tell me about your clan," he said. She told him. She told him the way a person tells the stories of home when they have been away from it long enough to feel the distance. The Stonecross clan, whose territory ran from the eastern highlands to the coastal trading routes, 40 families strong, a community of people who fished and traded and fought when they had to, and had maintained their crossing rights on the Tongue Causeway for 4 decades through negotiation and occasional, regrettable necessity. Her mother, who had been the clan's trade lead before Dorat, and who had died 6 years ago of a winter fever that had been bad even by peninsula standards. Her older brother Krath, who was large even by Orc standards, and who had the disposition of a very patient mountain. Her own years of solitary ranging, the reason she was always the one sent ahead to arrange things, she was trusted precisely because she worked alone and came back with what she had gone for. "You have always worked alone," he said. "Yes," she said. "Until now," he said. She tightened her hand around his. "Until now," she said. The night before the clan arrived, they were at the inn for the last time, and Snaga was quieter than usual, which he had learned meant she was turning something over in her mind rather than that something was wrong. He waited because he had learned that too. "Dorat will test you," she said finally. "She does it to everyone. She will ask you something that seems straightforward and that actually has layers, and she will watch how you answer and decide everything about you from that." "What kind of question?" he said. "I do not know. It is different for everyone." She looked at him steadily. "What I know is that if you answer honestly, even if the honest answer is difficult, she will respect it. She cannot tolerate performance. She has spent 60 years watching people perform." "I am not much of a performer," he said. "No," she agreed, "that is one of your best qualities. What are my others?" He said, which was a question he would not have asked 3 weeks ago and would have no trouble asking for the rest of his life. She looked at him with that warm directness. "You are brave without being reckless," she said. "You are patient without being passive. You are honest without being brutal. And you are kind in a way that does not seem to cost you anything, which means it is not a performance." She paused. "And you make me laugh. I had forgotten I liked doing that." He pulled her toward him, her hand still in his, and she came willingly, easily, fitting herself against him in the way that had already begun to feel necessary. "She will like you," she said into his shoulder. "She will not say so for a while, but she will like you. And the others. Krath will think you are small," she said. "He thinks most people are small. It is not an insult, it is just his reality. He will try to feed you too much at every meal because he assumes smaller beings need encouragement." Jeremiah laughed and she laughed, and they stayed like that in the firelight for a long time. The Stonecross clan arrived at the causeway landing at low tide on the new moon morning, which was overcast and cold, the sea a flat gray mirror under a sky of the same color, the wind carrying salt, and the particular electric smell of approaching weather. They came in 3 wagons with loaded trade beds, a dozen horses, and what appeared to be approximately 20 adults walking alongside, with Dorat at the front in the traditional position of trade lead. Dorat was 63 and small by Orc standards, and had the posture of someone who knew precisely where they stood in any room they had ever entered. She wore a heavy trade coat of dark wool over leather, and she carried a walking stick that was almost certainly not needed for walking. She had silver-streaked hair and eyes the color of storm water, and she looked at Jeremiah with the assessment of someone who has evaluated a great many people and found most of them wanting. Snaga walked to meet her, and there was an exchange between them in the orc tongue, rapid, low, the consonants rolling over each other that Jeremiah could not follow but did not need to. It was the exchange of two women who know each other well, the kind of conversation that has context going back years. Then Dorit looked at him, at his wrist, at the cord. She said something to Snaga, and Snaga answered, and Dorit looked at him again with a different expression, not warmer exactly, but more interested. She walked to him directly. "You are the bounty man," she said. Her common tongue was accented but precise. "I am," he said. "You work alone." "Usually," he said. "Not anymore," she said. It was not quite a question. "Not anymore," he agreed. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she said, "When you are in a territory you do not know and someone offers to guide you, how do you decide whether to trust them?" He thought about it honestly, because she had told him she could not tolerate performance, and she meant it. He could see it in every line of her face. "I watch what they do when they think I am not watching," he said. Anyone can maintain a performance when they know they are being observed. What a person does in the spaces between observation tells you what they actually are. Dorit was quiet for a moment. "And what did you watch Snaga do?" she said, "when she thought you were not watching?" "She went to the harbor master's clerk first," he said, "before she came to talk to me. She had seen the documents, she knew someone's farm was being taken illegally, and her first action was to go to the person with legal authority to stop it. Not to me, not to make a deal, to the person who could actually help." He paused. "That told me she was someone who moved toward solutions rather than advantages." Dorit looked at him for a long time, then she looked at Snaga, then she looked back at Jeremiah. "You see her clearly," she said. "I try to," he said. Something moved through Dorit's expression. It was not approval exactly. It was the recognition of something she had been hoping to find and had expected not to. "Come," she said, and turned back toward the wagons with the expectation of someone who does not look to see whether they are being followed because they already know they are. He looked at Snaga. She was looking at him with an expression that was so full it was almost more than her face could hold, and she stepped to his side and put her arm around his shoulders, which was a slight reach downward, and she made it seem like the most natural thing, and they walked toward her clan together. The next 2 days were the trading days on the tongue, and Jeremiah discovered that the Stonecross clan's commercial instincts were sharp and efficient, and that Snaga in a trading context was as formidable as Snaga in a combat context, which was very formidable indeed. He helped where he could. His knowledge of peninsula suppliers and their tendencies toward markup was genuinely useful, and learned where he could not. And Krath fed him considerably more than he needed at every shared meal, which he ate all of because Krath's cooking was excellent, and because some gestures of welcome are best received by simply receiving them. Krath himself was a figure of considerable physical impression, taller than Snaga, broader across everything, with a quiet gravity that reminded Jeremiah of mountains in weather. He spoke rarely, and when he spoke it mattered, and on the second evening of trading he sat next to Jeremiah at the clan's communal fire and said, without preamble, "She has been alone too long." "I know," Jeremiah said. "She chose well," Krath said. It was 4 words, and it closed the subject, and Jeremiah understood that it was also the most Krath would ever say about the matter, and that it meant precisely as much as it sounded. He said, "I know that too." Krath gave him a look of slow, decisive approval, and handed him a bowl of something that was excellent and slightly overwhelming, and which Jeremiah ate all of. The trading concluded on the 3rd day, and the wagons were loaded with new goods, and the tide was right in the late afternoon, and the Stonecross clan prepared to cross the causeway back to the mainland. The sun was coming through the overcast for the first time in days, cutting the gray with long slants of gold, and the sea on either side of the causeway caught it and threw it back, and the tongue in that light was as beautiful as it ever got, which was very beautiful. Snaga stood with Jeremiah at the edge of the causeway. He had his travel pack over his shoulder. His affairs on the peninsula were in order. Fen Holder had a set of keys and a written agreement, and a handshake that had lasted longer than usual because Fen, who had known Jeremiah for years and seen him arrive at his farm alone after every absence, had looked at Snaga and then back at Jeremiah with the expression of a man who is very pleased about something and does not have the words for why. "Ready," Snaga said. He looked back at the tongue one more time, the harbor, the inn's chimney, the tournament grounds in the distance, the farm road curving away through the coastal pines. The cord around his wrist was warm in the afternoon light. "Ready," he said. She took his hand, and they walked across the causeway together, the tide beginning to creep in behind them, the sea rising on both sides, the mainland growing ahead of them with its hills and its roads and the Stonecross territory beyond, full of people who were about to meet Jeremiah Warren and discover what Snaga already knew. The crossing itself was 20 minutes of walking on the raised causeway path, the water on both sides growing incrementally higher as the tide came in, the last of the afternoon light moving across the surface of the sea in long gold sheets. The wagons had gone ahead, and most of the clan was already on the mainland, and they were alone on the causeway for those 20 minutes, which was not planned but which was the kind of gift that happens when circumstances arrange themselves without being asked. She walked beside him, her hand in his, and they talked about small things, the way the light was falling, the sound the sea made against the causeway stones, whether the weather would hold. The kind of conversation that is not really about any of its subject matter, but about the pleasure of being alongside someone you want to be alongside. "When we reach the clan camp," she said, "there is a formal claiming ceremony. It is not complicated. You will be presented to the circle and I will speak for you and you will speak for yourself, and if the circle has questions you will answer them. It is done by firelight so the faces around you will be visible." "Will Dorit have questions?" he said. "She already asked hers," Snaga said. "She is done." Krath's question is whether someone makes me laugh. I have answered it." He felt her thumb move across his knuckles as she said that. "And the others?" "The others will have various concerns," she said. "They will ask them, you will answer, and then they will watch you for a season and make their own determination." She glanced at him sideways. "But I am not worried." "You are not worried about anything," he said. "That is not true," she said in a quieter voice. "I worried when I asked you to come that you would say no." He stopped walking. She stopped too and turned to look at him, and they were in the middle of the causeway with the sea rising around them and the mainland ahead and the tongue behind, equidistant between two shores, which was about as clearly symbolic as geography ever got. "I was never going to say no," he said. "I did not know that then," she said. "I know," he said, "but I was never going to say no." He looked at her steadily, wanting her to have this, wanting her to carry it forward into every room they walked into together. "You walked into a room full of people who wanted you to fail, and you looked at the documents and you looked at me and you said we have the same problem. Not my problem or your problem. We have the same problem." He shook his head. "I have been solving problems alone for 10 years. That was the most welcome thing anyone has said to me in as long as I can remember." She looked at him, and what was on her face was the particular expression of someone who has been seen fully and is still adjusting to the altitude of it. She said, quietly, "Jeremiah." "Yes," he said. She took both his hands and pulled him toward her with the decisive, unhesitating strength that was entirely hers, and she held him, which was something different from kissing, something broader and warmer, her arms around him, his face against her neck, the sea wind moving over both of them, and she held him the way you hold something you have chosen and will not put down. "I have you," she said into his hair. "And you have me." "Yes," he said. They stood like that until the water on the causeway stones was ankle deep, and then she said, with the smile he could feel rather than see, "We should probably keep walking." We should probably keep walking, he agreed, and they did. And by the time they reached the mainland, the causeway was lost behind them in the incoming tide. The tongue sealed off from the mainland for the next several hours in its daily ritual of isolation. And ahead of them, the Stonecross clan campfires were visible in the late evening air, warm and specific and full of the sound of people who were already beginning to know him by reputation, and would know him by presence before the night was out. The claiming circle was held after the evening meal, when the fires were high and the sky above the mainland hills was showing its first stars, and the whole clan sat in the wide ring around the central fire. Jeremiah stood beside Snaga in the middle of it, his travel pack set aside, his trail coat on, the cord at his wrist visible. She spoke in the orc tongue, which was formal and correct for this setting, and Dorrit translated for him in a low voice at his side. His own position in the translation was something Snaga had arranged ahead of time, so he would know what was said. She said, "I bring him not because I need a companion, but because I have found one. I bring him not because he is strong enough to fight beside me, but because he is honest enough to stand with me. I bring him not because he asked to come, but because he would have stayed if I had asked it of him and chose to come when I did. He is mine by cord and by choice. I claim him before the circle." Then she turned to him. "Speak for yourself," she said. He looked at the circle of faces around him, 40 of them, orc faces, all colors and ages, all watching him with varying degrees of openness. He looked at Snaga. He looked at the fire. He said, "I am a bounty hunter from the peninsula. I have spent most of my adult life working alone and coming back to an empty house and telling myself that was sufficient. Then I met her, and I understood almost immediately that I had been wrong about sufficient." He paused. "I'm not what her people might have expected her to choose. I know that. But I will spend however long she will have me making sure that when she looks at where she is, she does not once regret the choice she made. That is all I have to offer, and it is everything I have." The circle was quiet. Then Krath said something in a single low word, and a handful of others echoed it, and Dorrit said at his ear, "It means accepted." Which is the word we use when something is exactly what it should be. He exhaled. Snaga took his hand. The circle broke into the sounds of a community settling back into itself, the formal moment passing into ordinary evening, and around the fire people began to talk and move, and someone somewhere produced an instrument and began to play something that was low and rhythmic and warm. Children who had been watching from the back of the circle filtered forward, and one of them, a bold young girl of perhaps 10, walked right up to Jeremiah and stared at the cord on his wrist with undisguised curiosity. "Is that Snaga's color?" she asked. "It is," he said. "She never gave anyone those colors before," the girl said. "No," Snaga said from beside him, "he is the first." The girl looked at him with the terrifying assessment of a child who has no reason to be politic about anything, and then she said, "You are quite small," and wandered back into the crowd. Jeremiah looked at Snaga. "Clan children," she said serenely. "She is not wrong," he said. "She is not wrong," Snaga agreed, "but you are exactly the right size for everything that matters." She said it with a perfectly straight face, and then the smile appeared, slow and real and warm, and he laughed, and she laughed. And around them the Stonecross clan's evening went on in all its ordinary, living warmth, and somewhere in it was the space they would occupy together, the space that already had the shape of something ongoing and real. Later, when the fire had burned lower and the camp had gone quieter, and the stars over the mainland hills were fully out, they sat together at the edge of the fire's warmth, and Snaga leaned against him in the natural, unself-conscious way she had learned to do over 3 weeks, and she said, "Where do you want to be?" He knew what she was asking. Not tonight, not just physically, she was asking where he wanted to be in the long shape of his life from here. "With you," he said, "however that arranges itself." "It will arrange itself between here and the peninsula," she said. "We cross twice a year. The farm will be yours to return to. My territory will be yours to range." She paused. "It will not be simple." "Simple was not working out for me," he said. She turned to look at him, her amber eyes finding him in the firelight. "I will carry you across that causeway myself if I have to," she said, and she said it with a seriousness that made him understand she was not speaking only about a causeway. "I know you will," he said. She took his face in both her hands in the way she had done that first night at the inn, and she kissed him the way she did things now, with the full, settled certainty of someone who has made a decision and is at peace with it, who chooses this and keeps choosing this, who reaches for this because it is right and known and hers. And he kissed her back with everything that had been sitting in him for 30 years waiting for something this real to be directed at. All the patience and the loneliness and the particular stubborn hope that had kept a man going out on bounty contracts and coming back to an empty farm because the farm was still there, and someday something would change. It had changed. She had walked through a door and looked at a document and said, "We have the same problem," and everything after that had been the natural consequence of two people paying attention to each other at exactly the right time. The morning came cold and clear, the first genuinely clear morning in weeks, the light coming over the eastern hills with the particular precision of winter sun, and the Stonecross camp woke around them with the sounds of a community that has commerce to conduct and trails to cover. Snaga was already at the central fire when he came out of the tent she had arranged for him, wrapped in his trail coat, his breath visible in the cold air, and she handed him a clay mug of something hot without looking up from the document she was reading, in the easy, natural way of someone for whom handing things to him had already become instinct. He took it. He stood beside her. He looked at the hills and the sky and the road that curved away from the camp toward the trading routes. "What is the first order of business?" he asked. She looked up from her document. "Dorette wants a full trade inventory before we move," she said. "There is a market 3 days east that she wants to reach before the next weather comes in. I can assist with the inventory," he said. "I know commodity pricing on this road." She looked at him with that quiet, settled warmth. "Good," she said. "Then we start." And they did. Together, as they had already established, was the only way either of them intended to do anything from here forward. The fire was warm behind them. The sky was open above. The causeway behind them was buried under the high tide, sealing the tongue off from the world for a few hours more, and the farm on its far shore was tended and waiting. And the cord at his wrist was exactly where she had tied it. And Snaga Earthshaker, who feared nothing and could have chosen anyone, had chosen Jeremiah Warren, and intended to keep choosing him, and he was done being alone in the way that actually hurts. The road east opened before them, and the wagons began to move, and they moved with them, side by side, into whatever came next.